What's up, everyone? Welcome to week 11. Wow, week 11 of the absolutely epic early week podcast. I am, as always, your host, JM to Win. I've been up for a normal amount of time, so my mind should be sharp. And I'm joined by a couple of my buddies who have had some longer than normal days. Let's start with Bobby. Bobby Fi, man, how you doing?
Sorry about that. Not bad, man. It wasn't the best weekend. It was very strange. I had all the right plays, but somehow none of them together. I'm starting to think maybe I should be a single entry guy like you.
Yeah, this is a really weird weekend in that I know Le'Veon Bell is obviously a stud, but I didn't expect 30+% ownership and would have been fine fading that high of ownership for some of the stuff I got. But I was kind of right on the edge of a lot of things until the last 42 seconds of that Cowboys-Steelers game. So interesting week for me. Broke a 3-week winning streak. So we'll get back to it this week and see what we can do with week 11. We're going to bring in our third member, the great Grant Neefer. Grant, why don't you kick us off with actually, let me pause real quickly. Grant had a Grant's rant planned. He was driving from LA to Seattle today, lengthy drive, and sent an email to us with his Grant's rant, which was a DFS-themed porno. And he had several actual DFS players thrown in there as characters and a whole plot. I wasn't quite sure if we could get that approved and get that on air. So Grant's rant, this will be his second choice of the week. So Grant, what do you have for us?
Yeah, I was going to talk about Shaft Kings, the porno, and about how guys are really multi-entry guys. That didn't work out. In any case, I still killed it this week in fantasy. Didn't play nearly as much as I wanted to, but I played a Monday night slate game on one website and turned $60 into $1,400. So that's not too bad. But I guess ranting this week, there's a supermoon tonight, and it's just the most ridiculous thing in the world that people care about that. You can get that every single night by looking through a magnifying glass. And I found out I'm not the only person on earth that has a belly button that's the smelliest part of their body. So I am no longer insecure about that. Thought you should let you all know.
Is that part of your love at first sight story?
No. If she had a smelly belly button, that's opposites attract in that area. You can't go after someone with a smelly belly button if you have one too.
That's a deal breaker for you?
I mean, nothing's a deal breaker for me unless, she's a normal height or weight.
That's fair. That's fair, obviously. On that note, I do appreciate the supermoon thoughts, because the other night we were driving and my wife gasped and she said, "That moon looks way bigger than normal." And I was like, "No, that looks like a normal sized moon." And then she looked it up and she was like, "There's a supermoon coming up in a couple nights." Then I felt like a real idiot. But yeah, so there you go. It can be a supermoon every night of the year if you look at it the right way. Before we get into the Week 11 slate, which I am tabbing the no value slate, and you'll see what I mean when we get into our trends or traps. But before we get into that, we have some punishment to dole out. So, Bobby, you got to help me out here. What I remember is I had Alshon Jeffrey last week in my bold call as the number one wide receiver. What did you have?
Demaryius Thomas.
So I guess you did better than I did.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I would have had Demaryius Thomas in my 444 lineup instead of Alshon Jeffrey, I think I would have come in like fifth or fourth.
You guys forget
so
that I had
it was significant because I had Alshon Jeffrey in 4 out of my 5 entries, and I only played 5 because I was on the road at my buddies, and I'm sorry, I had Demaryius in 4 out of 5, and the one I held on to Alshon to, that was a bummer.
And he started out 4 for 47 in like the first quarter and then did not. I actually faded Alshon, so I thought it worked out until all my late game players just completely bombed. Grant, what did you have last week? I know you won.
Eli Rogers.
Oh God. Okay, so I guess I lost again. So for those unfamiliar, we make a bold call at the end of the show. We had a good streak there where Grant got it wrong every week, but this is back-to-back weeks for me. The loser has to tweet out something of typically of Grant's choosing, something embarrassing, and cannot give any indication that the tweet is a joke. Grant, I wasn't sure if this broke the rules, but last week after I tweeted out that I had a serious crush on Mrs. Buttersworth, someone photoshopped my face onto, I believe you saw that, photoshopped my face onto somebody who had his arm around someone dressed up as Mrs. Buttersworth. And I did retweet that just because I was too good to pass
up. I had no problem with that at all.
So that did slightly indicate that the Mrs. Buttersworth tweet was a joke, but there you go. That was good stuff. So Grant, what do I have to choose from this week?
I actually didn't think of anything, so I'm just going to go off of the top of my head. Sometimes I buy a lobster and take a bubble bath. I give myself bubble boobs and pretend I'm the Little Mermaid. My spirit animal is a horse, so sometimes I throw in a saddle and head to the park and eat some hay. I'm blue, dabu dee, dabu die, and I'm also a guy that loves Nickelback.
I feel like this Nickelback thing has come up every week, and I think we need to save it for the most. Like if I'd said Lance Kendricks was the top scoring tight end of the weekend, and then he put up exactly 1 point. It's also funny thing about bold calls on a Monday night. You know, I say Alshon Jeffrey last Monday night as the top scoring wide receiver, and then by Sunday he's 30 to 50% owned. Because everybody else was on Alshon as well, so it wasn't actually all that bold of a call. But on Monday night it felt like it. So, and it was completely wrong. I'm going to go with the lobster one. Bobby, what are your thoughts on that? Approval of that tweet?
I do approve of that. I think that's good, and I agree with saving the Nickelback for something really significant, like calling Lance Kendricks this week would have been a good example.
Yeah, I think we really have to save it for you, Bobby, because you have the deepest hatred of Nickelback in the group.
I don't plan on losing just for that reason alone. My bold calls are not really that bold. They just seem bold at the time.
We're gonna have a week where where you get it wrong and all three of the choices are Nickelback related. Somebody probably listens to this show and is just a huge Nickelback fan, and they're like, I hate these guys because they all dislike my favorite band. I guess Grant doesn't dislike
on this show that
Grant loves them.
Back.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so Grant, no need to text or DM me that tweet. I'll go back and listen for the exact wording because it was pretty good at the time. So I will post that on Tuesday in the afternoon during premium tweet activity time and see what sort of razzing I take for that. Okay, so this week's slate. I don't know how much you guys have had a chance to look through it, but I was looking through it in my disappointment yesterday after my start of Marcus Mariota and Rashard Matthews went down the drain with the late games. And looking at this slate and realizing there's almost no value. And we talked about this last week, but there were a few things like Dontrell Inman, J.J. Nelson, where you could feel pretty comfortable going. This week it's really thin. There haven't been any major injuries in a while. There haven't been any major changing roles in a while. And yet we have guys like Le'Veon Bell against Cleveland, Antonio Brown against Cleveland, places where people will really want to look to pay up. So a lot of people will probably end up on suboptimal lineups if no major values come available because they'll force in some stuff just to fit in those high-priced guys. So on our Trender Trap this week, we're going to talk about 5 places where we could potentially get some value based on whether we think something is a trend or a trap. And the first place I'm going to start, and Grant, since you are in the great city of Seattle at the moment, I will start with you on this one, and that is CJ Prosise and his expanding role. But this next week, we have this weird thing where Thomas Rawls is also coming back. We have this weird thing where last week Christian Michael had a hamstring injury, although he still did play a decent amount, like enough that I don't think that it was just because of the injury that Prosise got all the touches. And then on top of all that, Prosise looked really good. So he's, I believe, 3,900 this week. So Grant, what's your take on Procise this week? Is that a viable place to go for value, or do you think that's a trap?
Sorry, I was
Hey,
muted. I
there
think
we
he's
go.
a fine play. Yeah, it's one of these things where Rawls, they're going to ease him back into it, and Christine Michael is just terrible. We saw it 2 weeks ago. They don't like him too much. And so Procise is going to be on the field a lot. Can't remember who they're playing at this point. I think it's Philly. And so against Philly, they don't allow a lot of passes out of the backfield, but I don't think that matters with Procise. And he's, on top of that, a very explosive back. You can't trust him in cash, but he's a guy that can break off a 50, 60-yard run at almost any given time. Philly's decent against the running back, but like as I said, Michael's terrible, and Rawls is going to get just eased back into the lineup. And Procise, I think, is going to be the main back. And it's a GPP flyer, so I don't think he's one of those guys where you can count on 10 or 15-point floor, but I could easily see him getting 15 points in most scenarios because he had 8 catches this last week. Use him only in full-point PPR leagues, but he's at 3,900. That's all you're asking for is 10, 15 points, and he should get that.
Bobby, what's your take on this situation?
I would leave it alone this week until I know more about Rawls coming back. I'll wait to see what they say as it goes on, but he did look really good. It could be something going forward. If I saw it one more time, I probably would go with it. It's not a spot where I'm jumping all over it, partly because of what Grant mentioned, that Seattle actually is pretty good at defending running backs out of the backfield, catching the ball out of the backfield, which I would see more as his value in this kind of a game. So I'm not all over it this week, but I do think it could be something going forward, something to look out for.
So that kind of answers the second question I had on this, which is if no more news comes out throughout the week to where things get cleared up on how much Rawls will play or whatever, if it's just kind of silent and speculative on that front, you would be avoiding. I mean, at this point in the week, obviously it's Monday night when we're recording this, things change. But at this point in the week, Bobby, you're saying that you would be avoiding Procise if no more news comes out?
If no more news comes out, I would probably have him in about 10% of my lineups. But it's early in the week, and I haven't gone through everything entirely, so I feel a little bit uncomfortable saying that. But as of this moment, I probably would have him in 10 to 15% of my lineups. Yeah,
absolutely. And again, it's one of these things where, like, I hate for listeners to listen to this and take anything we say as like bonding that, they said they're not going to be playing this guy and then he's in half of their lineups, because this is Monday night, and the main goal of this podcast is to just kind of help us all get some early thoughts out there, get a start on the week. But yeah, it's an interesting thing where if we go through the week and nothing gets cleared up, there will be very low ownership on Procise unless he starts getting talked up. There would be low ownership on him because it would be so uncertain, and that would make kind of an interesting spot in my mind. So Grant, what's your take on that if we don't get any more information?
Well, I don't think Rawls is even going to play. I mean, they push him back every single week. But if he plays, as they've already said he's probably going to, this is the plan week, it's a GPP play. He has upside. He can catch the ball. If they're from behind, they're going to have him in more than Rawls. It's one of those things where he has big upside. You can play him in GPPs. It just all depends on how much balls you have. If you're a single entry guy, then don't play him if you're JM.
Early week, I think he could be cash viable just because, like you said, they don't really like Christine Michael. He came back with kind of renewed focus after getting cut by the Cowboys last year. If I remember correctly, he got cut when Darren McFadden was even hurt. I mean, the Cowboys were desperate for a running back, and Christine Michael is such a knucklehead that he got cut. And he went back to the Seahawks and finally started playing up to his talent and started out this year on fire. I mean, looked really good on the field, and then has just trickled off again as he's kind of prone to doing. And I do think there's a chance that, they're saying Pete Carroll said today, which obviously Pete Carroll's always lying, but he said today that Rawls is coming back this week. But yeah, I think that they could very easily ease him in and make this a viable spot. It's an interesting place on a week without a ton of value to get potentially 20 touches at running back, but definitely a tough call this early in the week. The next one is a really interesting spot for a week without a ton of value, and that is Packers pass defense. Is it really this bad. I mean, I know Mariota's looked good lately, but he put up, he was at 300 yards when he'd thrown the ball 22 times. Or I guess he didn't hit 300 yards. My lineup definitely knew that. But 290 yards or whatever, throwing the ball, the first 22 passes. So the question, they're playing the Redskins this week on Sunday Night Football. So the question is the Packers' pass defense really this bad? And this is an interesting question because even if Deshaun Jackson comes back, the most expensive wide receiver on the Redskins this week is $5,400. That's Jamison Crowder. Deshaun Jackson's $4,800. Pierre Garçon's $3,900. So if the Packers' pass defense really is this bad, these guys become great values this week. Cousins is one of my favorite values at quarterback early in the week. So, Bobby, I'm going to throw it to you first. Packers, if they get Clay Matthews back, are they suddenly a lot better? I mean, we've had two instances, the week that Marvin Jones tore them up, and then this last week where they just got crushed without Clay Matthews and then looked better when he got back in. Is this still a place that you'd be excited to go pick on Sunday Night Football?
I mean, after watching Sunday, it's really hard for me not to say, yeah, I want to jump all over it. They looked awful. They've looked awful. It's been when I first saw their defense early on in the year, it looked like a completely different defense. I understand the injuries and all that, but that was ridiculous. And I will be all over them as of this moment. Again, it's still Monday, but I feel like that's a great game to target. You want to try and win a big GPP. That's a game that you could look at both sides of and absolutely love. Green Bay, their defense, I don't know. I mean, I understand all the injuries, but it's awful. It might be the worst defense in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I mean, that pass defense has been really torchable lately. Mariota just looked like he was in a scrimmage, like a 7-on-7 scrimmage out there.
Yeah.
This week, so I'm going to ask you about this one too, and that is, so I always talk about we optimally want to get 20 points from everybody. I don't like rostering a cheap guy just to try to get 3x and fit in the expensive guys, because then if the expensive guy doesn't go off, then you're really lowering your upside. But without a ton of value, somebody like Pierre Garçon, and these are his recent points on DraftKings: 14.1, 12.7. He had a 4-point game, and then 13.7, 16.6. I mean, that 16.6 is his ceiling on the season. 81 yards is his max on the season. But that's still kind of interesting to be almost certain to get double digits at 3,900. So,
but also, like I just said, I mean, if I truly believe the Packers have the worst pass defense, all those numbers he hasn't hit a ceiling. He hasn't played a game that he even has a ceiling. Because if their pass defense is that bad and will let somebody light them up the way that they got lit up, and if they stay in the game with Rodgers, which I think they will, Garçon could easily hit over 20 because he hasn't really played in that kind of a situation against a defense that might be this bad, missing I don't know how many backs right now. Anyway,
yeah, that's a good point. Also, he only has one touchdown on the year, and I don't have the red zone target numbers in front of me. I believe he's pretty far down the team. I know Jamison Crowder is near the top of the NFL in red zone targets, but still, if he gets a touchdown, then he hits a higher ceiling. One other note on that, looking through his game logs, actually his best games have been against tougher defenses. His worst games were against Detroit and Cleveland and Dallas, but Detroit and Cleveland, which would also make sense because he's not really the number one option on this offense. So against a worse defense, he's not getting as many looks because the number one option is open more. So that's also, I guess, something I hadn't thought about when I asked that question. Grant, let's pull you into this. What are your thoughts on the Packers' pass defense and on going toward the Redskins as a passing offense this week?
So the Packers' pass defense, injuries is a lot to do with it. That's a very significant amount. But also you look at the games at the beginning of the season, Jacksonville, Minnesota, anemic offenses. Detroit, New York Giants, not great offenses. And all four of those have terrible, terrible rushing games. Then after that, you start to see, besides Chicago, everyone just rail them to the ground. And I think a lot of it has to do if they face a team with a good running back and they have to worry about the run a lot more, because the reason why Mariota shredded him is because Murray was shredding them. They had to worry so much about Murray the entire time that it took away from their ability to guard against the receivers, guard against the tight end. So it's one of those things where this week it could go either way. They are bad. They are a very bad defense. But one of the things we have to look at is the fact that Washington does not have a running game. I still think that all those guys are viable options. Like, I'm not as high on them as I would be if in this scenario, but I'm still very high on them. And Garcon. So Garcon, his longest catch this year is 23 yards, which he's been known as a speedster in the past. Maybe he's lost a few steps. I don't know. I haven't looked up into this enough, but you got to realize that last year he had several well over 30. The year before he had like a 70-yard reception. He had several over 30. He had, I think, a few over 40. He's a guy that can really break one off. He just hasn't seemed to do it yet this year, which is very surprising. I think a lot of that is a few of bend don't break defenses besides maybe Detroit. But it's one of those things where he's going to break one of these off one time too, and his targets have been consistent throughout the entire year. 2 of 5, which is an outlier, but he's had 4 games of 7 targets and 2 double-digit target games, including an average of 9 for the last 4 games. He's going to get targets. He makes a pretty good percentage of pulling them in. So his floor is actually a lot higher than you think it is, I believe. And going against an anemic defense, I think it pushes it up from 10 to 15. His ceiling, he breaks off 1 run for a touchdown. That's going to add about 13 points on top of that. He could end up with 23 to 28 easily.
Yeah, I mean, Garcon has always been good with the ball in his hands, so that makes sense. He hasn't broken one off. Obviously, it also changes if Deshaun Jackson comes back or not from his shoulder injury. If he is out again, then those targets really get concentrated this week. And another thing, that we'll have to think about throughout the week is the Packers. I mean, the Redskins have a bottom 3 run defense, and it didn't show this last week against Minnesota with Stephon Diggs torching them, which we all touched on last week, that we weren't really that concerned about Josh Norman on Diggs. Diggs would be in the slot a lot. The Diggs short routes didn't play to Norman's strengths. But before this last week, the Redskins do line up as a top 11 or 12 pass defense. So there's a chance that this game doesn't end up getting as out of hand just because the Packers aren't going to just run the ball. They're going to primarily stick to the pass, which could prevent them from scoring as easily as they could against a bad pass defense, and could prevent this from becoming just a back and forth shootout. I definitely from looking through and looking for values, the Redskins are some of my favorite plays this week, but those are some thoughts to think about. The third one we want to talk about is Golden Tate. And Golden Tate this week is priced at $5,300, which is pretty solid value for a guy whose recent targets have been 12, 9, 12, and 10. So that those, first the 12 and the 10 targets came with Eric Ebron out and Theo Riddick out. And they both returned in week 8, and I had no interest in Golden Tate because his targets hadn't gone up till those 2 guys were out. And then he went out and got 9 targets. And then in week 9, he went out and got 12 targets, again, with those guys back in the lineup. So, Bobby, I'm going to throw it to you on this one. Golden Tate against Jacksonville, who, by the way, is one of the top defenses at limiting yards per pass attempt, but they do allow a high completion percentage because they allow a lot of underneath passes, which is where Golden Tate thrives. So, is that something you'd be interested in this week, Golden Tate at 5,300? Do you think those targets are for real, or do you think this is a trap?
Yeah, on DraftKings, I think that's a legitimate play. I think he makes sense. I think there's other spots I like a little bit better, but I think he's a very legitimate play this week. I do think that he'll get a lot of pass attempts underneath. I don't think that the attempts are a trap. I'm not going to be all over it. I still think there's other places that I could go even in that game, but I don't know. I'm not totally in love with it, but I could justify it.
You have any thoughts on Marvin Jones? I mean, he's $5K, which is obviously a massive drop from where he was. Let's see, just back in week 5, he was 7,600. As recently as week 7, he was 7K. Now he's 5K, but his targets lately have been 5, 7, 5, 6, 5, 7. Any thoughts on Marvin Jones in that same matchup?
Yeah, I mean, it's tempting. I have to sort of see how the week plays out and try to investigate. I'm almost like trying to find a reason to play him at this point. I don't know if I really even have one except for his price and the upside. But that's enough sometimes. And I don't know. It's not something I was on before we started talking about it, but thinking about it I could see it.
Yeah, it's just such a weird thing to look at his game logs and see a 205-yard game or whatever it was on this season, and then this guy's priced at 5K because he's done nothing since. But it's not even like Allen Robinson where you're like, yeah, you still want to be on him because the targets are there. Like, just all of a sudden the targets evaporated. It's a really weird situation with Marvin Jones.
It is.
Grant, thoughts on Golden Tate and in that same matchup, Marvin Jones? You think these targets for Golden Tate are for real? You think there's anything that could lead to a spike for Marvin Jones?
So I don't think it's gonna. It's one of those things where throughout the course of the season, there's been one clear receiver that's just balling every single week. At the beginning of the season was Marvin Jones, and then it regressed back to Golden Tate, who we all thought would be the great one in this offense. And so I don't think that they're going to go down that much. I mean, they don't run the ball that much. They're going to have a lot of pass attempts, and Stafford seems to prefer him greatly at this point right now. He's cheap enough where I think targets, they might regress a little bit, but I don't think they're going to regress to a drastic extent. They went up against Minnesota, who has a great pass defense. It's been a little bit worse in the last few weeks, but still a great pass defense. And he still ended up getting 12 targets and pulling down a lot. He's a good wide receiver, and it makes me think that there was something wrong with him at the beginning of the season, maybe an injury or something that they didn't really disclose. So I think that it is going to continue to be Golden Tate for the rest of the season, and that Stafford, I mean, we saw it when Calvin Johnson went down 2 years ago. He switched right over to Golden Tate, and he was one of the top wide receivers for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then it dropped off at some point when Calvin came back. But I don't think that this is going to change at all. And Marvin Jones, Marvin something, Starvin Marvin, is not going to be that great throughout the rest of the season. I could be wrong, but until they seem to prove otherwise, I think it's regressed back to Tate.
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting week in that because the Jaguars, focus on preventing downfield passing, it does play to Tate's strengths. I do think with Tate primarily in the slot, we could see a lot of Jalen Ramsey on Marvin Jones, on Starvin Marvin. Not that Jalen Ramsey has been an all-pro or anything, and he is a rookie. It is week 11. He could be hitting a rookie wall, but he has been solid this year. And if Marvin Jones is getting 5 or 6 or 7 targets against a solid cornerback, it's a little tougher to get excited about. So I think we got that one pretty much covered. I don't know that I actually said my thoughts. I think Golden Tate, I think the targets are there. I mean, I think it's for real. It's scary just to look back and see the low targets to start the season. Grant, what you said might be it, just an undisclosed injury early on. But I do think the targets are for real, and I think that it's a good spot to look this week, and probably something that will go pretty thoroughly overlooked. I mean, that's just a guess. Pay attention to chatter throughout the week, but that's my early week thought there. So here's a weird one for you, Los Angelans. Is that how you say that? Is it Los Angelans?
I'm pretty sure that's not how you say it.
No. What is it?
I think we're Angelinos.
Angelinites.
Angelina Jolie's.
Move to Portland. That's easy. Or just Portlanders. All right. So for you, Langelites, we got this dude, Kenny Britt, Jeff Fisher's best buddy, who's trailed around the country with him, all of a sudden is like a legit fantasy force, right? I mean, so he has double-digit DraftKings points in 5 of his last 6 games. He has hit 20 or more in 2 of his last 4. And his targets over the last 4 weeks are 10, 6, 8, and 8. He's still on the Rams. He still has Case Keenum throwing to him. So still nobody wants to roster him, and still he's priced at only 5,200. I believe he was 49 last week. He was 49 last week, and I kept passing over him when building my lineup. And I kept trying to get onto Jamison Crowder at 5K with Captain Munnerlin out in the slot, and just kept looking at Britt right next to him like, there's no way I'm playing Kenny Britt. The 1 week I seriously considered him, and it was like Sunday morning I moved off him, was against Detroit when he put up 35.6 points at 3,700. So, I mean, this has become a serious, like a real thing. They're playing Miami this week. Not a bad pass defense, but not a phenomenal pass defense. So, Grant, I'll start with you. Kenny Britt, is he a viable play this week? Is this just like a multi-week trap, or is this a trend that we can trust moving forward?
So I'm bringing back some knowledge from way, way back in the day. I think it was Billy Bullock to Drew Bennett, I want to say, when all of a sudden Fisher has some guy in his office that has never done anything before in his life, and then all of a sudden he's the best wide receiver in the league for a few weeks span. I believe that was Fisher that was coaching that team, and I believe it was Titans. But in any case, you look at the last 3 games that St. Louis has played, they put up 10 points, 10 points, and 9 points. They're clearly seeing that there is nothing redeemable in their entire offense at all. Gurley is just dreadful this year. I think he's averaging near the bottom of the league in yards per carry. And I don't think there's a Trent Richardson scenario where everyone thought he was good and he's bad. Like, he's a great running back, and I think it's just a problem this year. But I think they've started to regress for him, just trying to force as much out of Tavon Austin. Austin's still getting targets, and he's still trying to get involved with the offense. But on all these games, it's not like he's getting an incredible amount or pulling in a very, very large amount of the targets. I think he is about 56%. So it's one of those things where he's averaging a pretty decent amount of yards per reception. So they're getting him in like right in that middle route almost every single week. And he's going to be heavily involved. The offense has got to go somewhere. They don't pass too much to the tight end, I don't believe. And Austin's obviously not that great. Quick can have good weeks and then not have good weeks. He's been inconsistent, if I can remember right, for this season. But it's one of those things where 2 of those games he got touchdowns, but most of them he's getting receptions and he's getting yards. He's averaging a lot of yards per reception, and it's been consistent every single game throughout the course of the entire season outside of Tampa Bay. And so he's going to get 4 to 5 receptions at least, and he's going to average 12 to 15 yards of reception minimum. He's got a floor of 10 points, which for his price isn't the worst thing in the world, but his realistic floor in most games, 90% of them, is going to be around 15 points. And he has a high upside because he's obviously the favorite to get a TD in any scenario unless Austin goes off for a 50-yard run, which he obviously can do.
Yeah, the one reason, the week I didn't use him against Detroit, I talked him up in my game-by-game breakdown, but also presented the caveat that he had, I think, 1 target inside the 10-yard line that year and 1 target in the red zone. And I said that makes sense because Case Keenum is less likely to throw outside the numbers in a condensed area. And then Britt went and had 2 touchdowns that week. And then, has 1 more since then. But really when it comes down to it, it's not even Keenum's limitations as far as throwing outside the numbers. It's more like the Rams don't score touchdowns. I mean, you read off their point totals. So yeah, the upside is lowered by the fact that they have a very difficult time scoring. The Dolphins they have a tremendous coach in Adam Gase, and there's a culture change that needs to happen down in Miami, but they've won 4 games in a row. So this is probably another spot where the Rams don't top 10 points or 13 points, but yeah, like you said, Britt should get the targets, should get 50 yards minimum, and that's worth something at least. Bobby, what's your take on Kenny Britt?
Yeah, I'm very tired of trying to pick Tavon Austin instead of Kenny Britt. I did actually have him his big week. I had him all over the place. Against Detroit. I haven't gone there since then. I see all the reasons why I should. I totally agree with everything Grant said about his realistic floor. I don't know. For some reason, I don't really trust this. It's just a weird offense. It's hard to take anybody from that offense, to be honest with you, if you're trying to win a large GPP. But yeah, he's got the potential, and he has a high floor and realistically high ceiling. I don't know. For some reason, there's other places I want to go, but I can't even justify entirely why, except for that he's Kenny Britt. These are the LA Rams. Case Keenum's throwing the ball. And I think it's just as likely to be someone else next week, but I've thought that for 5 weeks. So
yeah, I mean,
I've been wrong.
Those are all obviously very good reasons. It's just, he keeps putting up the production. And on a week where, I'm hoping that there are a couple 3,500 or 4K guys who by later in the week, it's like, oh, this guy is A, somewhat sneaky, and B, a pretty solid bet for 20 points. But right now, early in the week, what we're seeing is a lot of high 4K, low 5K guys who could potentially put up 20 points. And that doesn't necessarily open you up to just go Antonio Brown, but it does open you up to have a really solid team and still pay up for a couple guys, if these lower priced guys hit. So the last one I want to talk about, which might end up being the most popular one by the end of the week, and if it's not, it probably should be, and that is Robert Woods. The one reason why it might not be popular is because his big game against Seattle happened in week 9, and then the Bills went on bye. But Robert Woods is genuinely the only wide receiver that team really has. They have Marquise Goodwin, who's just a straight downfield guy. They have Justin, I'm blanking on the name, the former Titans guy.
Hunter.
Yeah, there we go, Justin Hunter, who is going to score like a touchdown every other week on one target. But Robert Woods, his targets have been 13, 7, 6, 6, 10, 8. So 6 targets has been his floor. And those were that was against San Francisco and LA. No reason for him to not get targets there, but still, I think that with a floor of 6 targets, that's really more just that the Bills prefer to run the ball. And this week they're playing Cincinnati, who has a pretty poor run defense and a pretty poor pass defense. We can probably, because the Bills will be able to run, we can probably only project Woods for 7 or 8 targets. But at 4,900 in a good matchup, that's a pretty sweet target total with when you have a floor of 6 when he's the number 1 receiver. So, Bobby, I'm going to start with you again. Robert Woods at 4,900. Any interest there in him, being the number 1 receiver, or do you think it's just a trap that number 1 receiver doesn't mean as much on a team that doesn't throw the ball as much?
Yeah, it's hard for me to take receivers on that Buffalo team. I understand he had 13 targets and he had a huge game in the last game against Seattle. I don't know. I'm interested in it. He'll definitely be in some of my lineups as of right now. But I actually feel like there is some value that I feel like I found that maybe I don't know if I found it, but I could make an argument for it, and I like a little bit better. But I do see him as a somewhere in that mid-tier range. I think he's somebody who's definitely interesting. He'll definitely be in some of my lineups. I'm not in love with him, maybe as much as you think he maybe should be. I would like to see a little more consistency out of their passing game, and I think it's so much situational how they play. They want to run the ball. That's who they are. It's hard for me to take receivers, but like I said, I can make a good argument for him. I don't love it, but I definitely will have some exposure to him.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. That don't love it, but and again, I mean, the Bills are, I believe, bottom 3 in the NFL in passing play percentage. They don't throw the ball a ton, but when they do throw it, he's one of the first guys they look to. It's like the running backs and Robert Woods. So, which on that note, LaShawn McCoy should obviously line up as a tremendous play this week. Coming off the bye, should be healthy. It's going to be popular. He's only 6,900, which is a lot cheaper than a lot of the other top backs. But he's in a good spot as well. Should get some catches, some carries, so on. But we got to find value in some places, and that's one of the spots I'm seeing. So, Grant, any thoughts on Robert Woods in this wide receiver situation on the Bills?
Yeah, I mean, he's the number 1 wide receiver. The other options aren't good. The only other decent option really is just Charles Clay. I mean, he gets, but he's kind of limited to 7 targets a game. I don't think he's going to get much more than that. The Buffalo offense has actually been fairly efficient. I think before he got picked off last game, Taylor had the longest without an interception streak. And obviously, if we saw it tonight, I think this has been true in the past, but since he has been a team that gets turnovers fairly often, but also they're a team that really their secondary isn't great, but their front 7 puts enough pressure on you, especially with Geno Atkins every single week, where it's always a problem. So you kind of have to rush throws. But Taylor, he can run the ball, so he can really extend the plays, where Robert Woods always seems to get open whenever he seems to do that. At least that was my thought when I watched the Seattle game. I think that you can rely on him for double-digit targets this week. And I think that he is a great play. And I mean, I've been suggesting him for a few weeks now, and I really like the play. And the fact that no one else will be on him, according to you guys, makes me like him even more.
Yeah, definitely something to pay attention to throughout the week as far as chatter. But I would imagine that we're going to, especially because I think we'll see high ownership on McCoy, and that'll draw ownership off of Woods for sure. So definitely a place to keep an eye on. One more place just to bring up really quickly that is worth paying attention to for value is Martellus Bennett if Rob Gronkowski is in fact out this next week. Ian Rappaport reported earlier today that Gronk had a punctured lung. And I was just telling a buddy yesterday, have you ever noticed how often Rappaport is wrong, that he'll have a report and then Schefter will come out with a different report a couple hours later, and Schefter's always right. Anyhow, Schefter came out later today and said Gronk does not have a punctured lung, but he still seems kind of iffy for next week. Martellus will not be sneaky, but that'll be another person to pay attention to for strong value. We're going to move on to Love at First Sight. And this is where we each talk about the game that is standing out to us early in the week. But before we get to that, we always like to get a Love at First Sight story from Grant, who shockingly has more than enough to last for the entire season. So Grant, what do you have for us this week?
So we've all been in slumps before, and we all need a slump buster every once in a while. So I was up in San Fran a little while ago. My buddies knew I was in a slump. They just got me real drunk, and then all of a sudden I'm going in an Uber back to a girl's place, and this girl has no redeeming qualities in the world, none whatsoever. And so I get up there and I keep trying to get out of the Uber and run away, but somehow I end up back there with her and her friend. Her friend falls asleep and things happen. And the entire time, all I'm thinking to myself is, how do I get out of here? How do I get out of here? How do I get out of here? I find no way to get out of there. And so I wake up not knowing where I'm at 6 o'clock in the morning, hating myself. And I look around and they're still asleep. So I grab my pants, put them on, and I grab my shirt and my shoes, gently tip towards the door, and run outside and run 2 blocks down the street with no shoes or shirt. Call my buddy to go back to his place, almost in tears because I hate myself. He says, all right, yeah, I'll open the door when you get there. I order an Uber, and my phone dies. So I put on my shoes and shirt and walk uphill for an entire mile, get to my buddy's place, realize there's no way to get in because I can't call him. And so I'm sitting hungover as all hell in the middle of San Francisco at 6 o'clock in the morning, wearing my clothes from last night, pretty much crying, sitting at a tree. And then I see him. The love of my life. His roommate came down because he had to go on a flight to Europe, and he opened the door, and I got in and hated myself for the rest of my life.
This is the saddest Love at First Sight story ever.
But the moral of the story is someone with absolutely no redeeming qualities on or off the field is Mr. Jay Kutzler. Oh, man. So Jeffrey, he got reported that he's getting suspended for 4 games. I'm guessing he'll probably appeal it, but who knows? I mean, it's not like they really have anything to play for this season anyways. But he's going against New York Giants. We all saw that he got obliterated by the Tampa Bay defense this weekend. That's an aberration. Cutler still has some skill, and I don't think Meredith is obviously that bad of a wide receiver. I love Meredith this week. I love Miller. I love Royal. I am up in the air still about Cutler, but I think for his price and the fact that no one's going to be on him, I like him. They're going to have to score in this game somewhere. I mean, it could be Howard, but I don't know. The Jets' pass defense, I really don't think is that great. One thing they do is get turnovers. They give up a lot of points to wide receivers, not that many to quarterbacks. But it's one of those things where I would love to do a Meredith Royal stack because this is a week with no value. Them, I think they're 4,200 and 3,900. They're going to be the centerpiece of that offense. If Jeffrey plays, I like him and I like Cutler. But I absolutely love them this game, this week.
Yeah, I believe Jeffrey did say, took full responsibility today for what happened, which would imply that he's not going to appeal it. At least that's the implication. So should just be Meredith and Miller and Royal running around out there.
Yeah. So you can get 3 guys for under 12K total, and they could potentially all 3 get 15 points. It's definitely a possibility, and no one's going to be, or not as many people are going to be on because what Cutler did last week. The week before, the Bears actually looked good, which is surprising. And it's just one of those things where I think this game is completely blown out of proportion. The fact that they didn't do well, and then Giants on the other side, you slot those guys in with Beckham, and you just assume that it's going to be a game that's going to be a lot higher scoring than the 45.5 total, which still isn't even that low for a game.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I actually kind of looked at Royal and Meredith earlier. I had interest in Royal this last week. If you look through his game logs, obviously that was before Cutler came back, but he was a solid bet for double-digit points every game, and then thankfully I didn't use him because he went out and didn't get a catch until like the last play of the game. He had a 24-yard catch. But yeah, I mean, Royal has a history with Cutler. Miller has a history with Cutler. Cutler has a history of throwing to the guys he knows the best. But at the same time, he also has a history of throwing to the large receiver on the outside, which will be Cameron Meredith this week. So I think I think there's going to be, one guy who's just super usable. And like you said, maybe all of them end up being usable, but it'll be interesting to dig in this week and see who that most usable guy is in this spot. Bobby, what do you have for thoughts on that game and for your love at first sight game of the week?
Yeah, I feel like you guys totally sold me, especially Grant on that last game. I hadn't really thought about it. I think there's just so much value there. It makes it interesting. I did think about Meredith, but I didn't think about Royal so much. I think that's an interesting spot. And just because of how much you could save, I don't like Cutler. I'm not going to do that unless it's a very certain situation. But I do see that I can make an argument for all those receivers, mostly because of their price points. So I get that. I don't love necessarily the whole game, but I could see it. I also do love OBJ on the other side. So I think it's a good, it's a good spot. It's not my favorite, but it's a good spot. And as far as mine goes, for my love at first sight, I am definitely picking Green Bay at Washington. I'm going to do everything I can to just not stop playing Aaron Rodgers until there is some semblance of a running game. And I also think that, obviously we see how horrible their pass defense is against a team that can't run the ball and is going to throw the ball a million times. Deshaun or no, I'm going to be all over this game every which way. I'm going to stack it every which way. It's my favorite game as of right now. Unless something really weird happens, that's by far my favorite game of the week. It'll be the highest scoring game of the week, and I feel like it'll have the most opportunities for fantasy points. It's going to be hard to figure out on the Green Bay receiving side, as it always is. But if you're a multi-lineup guy like I am, you just keep mixing and matching.
Yeah, there's been a lot of weeks lately where if you were in the money after the late afternoon games ended, you were probably going to stay in the money because the Sunday night game was good defenses or bad offenses. This week, nothing is safe going into the Sunday night game because I definitely think Packers and Redskins will be a high-scoring game, and you'll probably want a piece of that game going into that night for sure. My game is going to be Tennessee at Indianapolis. The Colts have been playing better defense, but this is a phenomenal spot for DeMarco Murray, obviously. It's a strong spot for Mariota. It's a strong spot for Delaney. It's a strong spot for Rashard Matthews. And then on the other side, it's a strong spot for T.Y. Hilton, Dante Moncrief. And we see this with the guys kind of in that middling price range. Actually, let me check and see exactly what T.Y. Hilton is. Yeah, so 7,700. And people get so tied up in these, few names at the top that they're trying to move everything around in their lineup to pay up for. And that's Antonio Brown, Odell Beckham, AJ Green, Mike Evans this week. And those will probably be the guys. And then Jordy Nelson's right below those four at 7,800. But people are going to, pay down at receiver or try to jump up to those high-priced guys T.Y. Hilton should go overlooked. Allen Robinson, which is not in this game, but against Detroit, is right below T.Y. Hilton and should go overlooked. Playing at Lucas Oil Stadium, where the turf really helps Moncrief and T.Y. Hilton. So I think this is, it's currently the highest over-under on the week. It's not going to just sneak by anyone, but with people trying to force things around to get in these Pittsburgh players against Cleveland, Big Ben will be on the road, but I don't think that's going to scare anybody off given the matchup, given what Roethlisberger and Antonio and Bell did this last week. So as people are, focusing on that blowout, trying to jam in those guys, this game could go somewhat overlooked in spite of having the highest over-under. I definitely think it's a good place to look this week. So, Grant, any quick thoughts on this game or any further thoughts on that Sunday night game?
So T.Y. Hilton, I think, is going to be overlooked. I mean, you look at what he did before Moncrief came back, and it was double-digit targets, and then people believe that his targets went down because Moncrief was back, which had slightly to do with it. But a lot of it, I think, was hampered by that hamstring injury in the middle of one game. And then against Green Bay, he still probably had to deal with a little bit because hamstring injuries tend to linger. That should be completely healed up by now. I think that this is going to be a huge, huge game for him. And he should be his production prior to the last 2 weeks has been up there with Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, whatever, all those guys up there, and better than a lot of them in most weeks. He's going to absolutely destroy this week. A guy that you could go with is obviously Frank Gore, or is not obviously Frank Gore. I don't want to say Frank Gore, but he is a guy that still has 2 touchdown potential in a game that's this high scoring. And so if you play him, no one else is going to be on him. And I'm not condoning it completely, but it's because it's still Frank Gore, and I don't think he's gone over 100 yards more than once in the last 2 years. But he still has a bunch of touchdown potential, which is, for his price, and his ownership is enough. And on the other side, obviously, Murray has been one of the most consistent backs in the entire league. Play him, because I think people are going to be more on Bell and more on those other guys near the top because they have been ever since they came back because they believe them to be better running backs, which they are, but Murray is more consistent than anyone in the entire league right now. I don't remember Bobby's game at all. Was it Green Bay?
Yeah, that Sunday night Green Bay Washington game.
So Jordy looks like he's kind of back. In any case, he's had touchdowns nearly every game this entire season. They're going to have to pass the ball a lot. Washington, we already went through how I love Garcon. I love all the wide receivers. This game is going to be like all the other Green Bay games in the last few weeks. It's going to be a game where we'll see 80, 90 pass attempts between the two teams, and it's just going to be ridiculous. The problem is you can't really trust anyone on Green Bay except for Jordy, who I think had 18 targets this last week and leads the entire league by a decent margin in red zone targets. So if you're going to play wide receiver, play him. Rodgers is in play, obviously, because even when he looks terrible like he did this last week, he still put up 30 points. So there's going to be a lot of passes. So play the quarterbacks, pick your wide receivers wisely, and I think that if you feel ballsy, you can throw 2 wide receivers from either of the teams. You can throw 4 wide receivers from this game in, and if you hit the right ones, then you are going to destroy people.
Bobby, any thoughts on that Tennessee-Indianapolis game?
Yeah, I think that's a great game. I like it so much. I'm probably going to play Derrick Henry as well as, maybe not in the same lineup, but I think I'll take a look at him too, just for GPP's sake and some long shot tournaments, because I really feel like there's so many good spots in that game. I love taking running backs against Indianapolis in general, especially ones that can catch the ball at the backfield for obvious reasons. And I think that the Indianapolis passing game is going to have a field day. I mean, these teams just played a shootout game where I think what did Luck throw for 4 touchdowns, and T.Y. Hilton had a massive game. I think he had 30 fantasy, 7 for 137 and a touchdown. This just happened. It's not going to be any different indoors in Indianapolis, except for it might be a little higher scoring than the 34-26 game that just happened.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, moving it indoors is only going to help the scoring upside in this game. We're going to move on to Money Matters and take a quick look at some of the values, such as it is available at each position. So I'm going to kick it off with quarterback, and this is going to be, in my mind, one of the best places to save money this week, just because quarterback pricing is so bad, and you do have obviously appealing guys at the higher end of the price range, but Russell Wilson, who looks fully back right now, is only priced at 6,100. But even going below that, Kirk Cousins in that shootout with Green Bay, 5,800. Tyrod Taylor has been playing really well lately, is 18 plus points every week, is playing Cincinnati. And then one that's going to go really overlooked, and maybe I'll make this my bold call in some way, that's Colin Kaepernick at 5,200 against the Patriots. And my thought here is a couple things. One, we can probably expect the Patriots to put up some serious points against the 49ers, which is going to create garbage time opportunities. But another thing is the Patriots play a bend but don't break style of defense. And there were plays on Sunday night where they didn't even rush Russell Wilson. The four linemen would kind of get a push and then just hold their spot. Against a running quarterback, they're more concerned about not giving up the big play. And we saw it with, early in the game when the Seahawks kept getting down inside the 10-yard line, and then the Patriots would hold them to a field goal. And I believe the broadcast brought up that the Patriots are 15th in yards allowed, but second in scoring, at least coming into the game. And that really is the way that they play on defense, especially, without Chandler Jones there this year, without Jamie Collins there to wreak havoc. They're basically saying, hey, we're going to force you to drive the whole field, put together a good drive, and score at the end. And that might not mean a lot for Kaepernick's touchdown upside, but it's going to make it pretty easy for him to rack up another 60-plus yards on the ground and probably top 250 passing yards. So I think Kaepernick's a guy who will go overlooked and is actually a pretty safe play given the style of defense the Patriots play. So now that I've rambled on that one, Grant, any quarterbacks in this like 6K and below range that stand out to you that I didn't mention?
I don't know if you said Bortles against Detroit. Obviously, it's against Detroit. One, you basically mentioned everyone. I said Cutler earlier, which I'm still not entirely sold on, but I'm kind of sold on. Gonna have to throw a lot, and in games where Brown's quarterback throws a lot, they can actually put up some points. But one of the main things I want to mention is Kaepernick. I like more than anyone else in this range. Patriots aren't going to win by more than 3 this weekend. I'm calling it right now. It's ridiculous, and you guys are going to really, really shite on me in a second. But road teams who are 14-point underdogs over the last 7 years, I think, are like 13-1 against the spread. This is going to be a lot closer game than you think, and I think that's because Kaepernick's going to put up some points. It's been the best bet in sports over the last 7 years, I think. Take a road team that's 14 points or more as an underdog, and I think San Francisco's going to keep it close. I think Kaepernick's going to put up a lot of points, and I don't think Brady's going to do much on the other side. I think it's going to be more blunt.
I'm going to try to hold you to that as your bold call, and I'm assuming the bet is home teams. You mean that's 14-point underdogs? Grant.
I think that's what he meant.
No, road teams who are 14-point underdogs.
This game is in San Francisco.
Yeah, and they're a 14-point underdog.
Yeah, but they're not the road team. They're the home team.
No, sorry. Yeah, at home. Yeah, you're right. I'm dumb. You got me. You got me good, guys. You got me real good.
Do you still think this game's going to be a 3-point game?
I'm not using that as my bold call, but I'll take a 7-point game. They're going to go.
You said it was a 3-point game. You said I'm calling it right now. And
all right.
You still aren't.
I'll let you go 7-point game as your bold call.
Actually, I'm on a hot streak right now, and so when the Patriots lose, because I can do no wrong since I've won like 4 weeks in a row, I'll take it.
If the Patriots lose because of your bold call, I'm going to have issue with you this weekend, and I believe you will be in Portland this weekend. So we might have to have a throwdown if that's the case. I don't know how much power you wield over the Patriots' outcome with your bold call. So
I said that they would lose this last weekend.
Well, there you go. Bobby, any other quarterbacks? I think we've pretty much covered everyone.
Yeah, I think you guys pretty much covered everyone and then some. He touched on Bortles. I think he's a good play who always is going to be overlooked. Jump minutes count. He's been horrible in all these games, but he can be horrible and put up 30 fantasy points any night.
All right. Running back. Now I'm going to need your guys' help here because, so if we're going to say not like, oh yeah, this guy can get you 8 points, or this guy could break off a 100-yard run on his 5 carries, but like genuine plays, like guys you actually want to play. Who do you see? And I know, Grant, you're going to say Duke Johnson. You're going to say he gets blah, blah, blah targets. And then I'll counter by saying, yeah, he has a couple 17-point games in the last month, and then everything else has been 6 points, 4 points. So outside of Duke Johnson, who do we see that's like a viable play? Grant, I'll let you go first at running back. Anybody stand out to you under like 5K?
I'll go at 5K. Frank Gore, he doesn't have the upside as normal, but he can get double touchdown. If you look at him, I think he's still the 9th ranked running back so far this year in terms of points. I mean, maybe not full point PPR league, but in half point PPR league, I think he's number 9, which is still ridiculous. Darren Sproles, we all saw what Ryan Matthews did this last weekend. I don't care. Sproles still ended up the week, I think, with 10 targets and several catches. They're going to be playing from behind because Seattle's going to put up a lot of points because that's what they do the second half of the season every year, and they blow out a lot of teams. So they're going to be throwing it, and Wentz is going to target him a lot. Prosith, I already said that I really like him this week, and I think that his floor is 10. I really think that it is. I would say Duke Johnson, but you already told me not to. Then I haven't looked into this one at all, but Paul Perkins, I mean, obviously played tonight. I did look at what he ended with, but they think they're sharing the load, blah, blah, blah. It's against Chicago, so they could be running out the clock at the end of the game because they could be getting blown out, and that's when Meredith gets 27 receptions. But yeah, those are the only guys I'm really and then Gurley, if you really want to go balls to the walls, only 5K for how good he is, but he just looked dreadful.
Yeah, I like the Gore call. He has only 2 games all year under 14 points. I believe the only time I've actually recommended him this season was his last game against Tennessee, and he got 19 points in that one. But yeah, I mean, I like that call. And maybe Chris Thompson, if we think that the Green Bay and Washington game will, turn into just a lot of throws, then Chris Thompson could have value. I mean, that's obviously a high-risk play. And then Chris Ivory, 3,600 against Detroit. He sunk back down. The Jaguars went back to their old ways and sunk back down to 9 carries this last week. He's still splitting time with Yeldon, but, I mean, there's something there against the Detroit defense. But, not a ton to love. Bobby, what are you seeing at running back?
Yeah, I could see an argument for Yeldon or Ivory. Sorry, excuse me. I also I think that you can make an argument for GPPs. Like if you have a very straightforward, almost a cash game lineup, and you use somebody like Carlos Hyde, this could be an interesting week. I don't agree that game is going to be a 3-point or a 7-point game. I think New England will win it easily. I still don't think that doesn't mean Hyde could have a solid game. He's an excellent running back. There is, I don't know, it's just an interesting spot for a guy who'll be really underowned for, there's going to be times in this guy's career where we're going to be paying as much for him as we will for any other running back. And this is not necessarily the best weekend, but it's not totally the worst either. So I actually think he's a really good play, and I think Darren Sproles is interesting also.
Did I not say Hyde?
No, you didn't.
I get distracted sometimes. I got him highlighted. But yeah, look at his shoulder later on the week, because that's obviously something where he did terrible this last week, but that's against Arizona, which is a really tough matchup. And he's a good running back, and they're going to run the ball regardless of how far they are behind, which they won't be. They'll be ahead, so they'll have to run the ball anyways.
He's going to be 3% owned as of this moment, is my guess. I swear. Nobody's taking him.
Yeah, I think that's
he's 4,900 in a week where you need to pay up. I think he'll be higher than 3%, but not that much higher. I think
3 to 5%. I think is a good range to project him in. I don't think projecting them to be leading this game is the best call, but I do think especially, I mean, you're talking a defense in the 49ers, they run like 8 plays, and I'm pretty sure Belichick and Matt Patricia can figure out that before the game's over. So, but it should be an interesting one, especially to follow Grant's bold call of San Francisco blowing out the Patriots this week. Wide receiver, there's always a ton to touch on. So just because, anybody you could say, yeah, they could get, some targets. So I'm going to say, I'm going to go ahead and mention 3 guys that I like under 5K, and then have each of us mention just 3 guys that are really kind of standing out to us. So the first one for me is going to be Eddie Royal. We talked about that already. I think that familiarity with Cutler, and it could be Cameron Meredith instead, but Eddie Royal was kind of standing out to me first and foremost there, just because of the familiarity thing. Pierre Garçon, we already talked about, 3,900, and I'm kind of taking the good guys with those 2 guys that we already talked about. So I'll also throw in, I'll hedge here and say Alan Hearns or Marquise Lee. We mentioned Bortles. Sorry. We mentioned Bortles, or Grant mentioned Bortles. I kind of overlooked him when I mentioned quarterbacks, but Detroit can be beat on the ground or through the air, but the Jaguars are just so set on throwing the ball. They did it this last week, even after the coordinator change, and Darius Slay should be on Allen Robinson. So Darius Slay is not a shutdown corner, but he is a good corner, and that should filter some targets toward Lee and Hearns at 4K and 4,100. So those are some guys I like. Grant, who do you have at wide receiver? 3 guys that you like.
I haven't talked enough about the San Francisco game. So Mr. Quentin Patton, he's getting targets on the reg. I think he had 9 this last week. He's 3K right now, which is just a silly, silly, silly little price. I think he's going to end up with a lot of points, and I love pairing Kaepernick with him because they're going to destroy the Patriots. Tyler Lockett, it looks like Russell Wilson is back, and he could be getting 4 touchdowns every single week. Lockett's one of those guys where when Russell Wilson was doing well, he had a bunch of those 20, 25-point games put up because he's obviously a great deep threat. And now that Russell Wilson has the ability to throw the ball deep, he has one of the best long ball completion percentages, I think, of all time. I could be very wrong there, but I've never been wrong before in my life, so why not? And then Eli Rogers, I already said him last week, so I won't say him this week. Tyreek Hill, 12 targets this last week, 10 receptions. He's getting more and more and more into the offense. Yeah, well, I already know I took all your picks. Don't worry, Bobby. Yeah, so he's 4,500. Not many people are going to be on him, which is wrong. Kansas City is one of the worst pass defenses in the league against the wide receiver. They just happen to pick off opposing quarterbacks over and over and over again. Hashtag Ryan Fitzgerald. Ryan Fitzpatrick.
Wait,
Okay.
who was the last one? How many did you name?
I named 4, but then I took Eli Rogers back because I realized I had 4.
Who did you name?
I started getting confused there at the end when we were talking about Tyreek Hill and then Kansas City.
Against Kansas City. That's what confused me too.
Yeah, Hill against Kansas City.
He's on Kansas City.
Sorry, Tampa. Yeah, I got real dumb there. I'm not on my
you
guys.
You got all. No, you know what's funny is you got all this great stuff, and then every now and then you just one little hiccup.
In any case,
but the rest of it is money.
And that's what we latch on to. We don't latch on to you pulling out stats from like 15 years ago off the top of your head. We latch on to Tyreek Hill against Kansas City and then berate you for it.
I was just curious because I wanted to know because I have another receiver in that game who's one.
Yeah, I know you're gonna say that's who I was also gonna say, but I can't name 37 wide receivers. That's just not very nice.
So fine, I get to say Adam Humphries.
Bobby, the shaft by going last. So who do you like?
I like Adam Humphries a lot. The targets are up. There's big potential there. If you watch their games, they look for him a lot, and people are going to start keep double teaming Evans. It's a good spot. Kansas City's defense is actually much better than the numbers would show. I actually believe in this team a little bit, but they still can. They'll be a bend it, but don't break defense as well. Sometimes he'll get a ton of receptions underneath, and he's always got big play capability. Excuse me, I'm having a little bit of throat problems right now. But I also really like Garçon, as we talked about. Oh, Grant. I really like Tyreek Hill, who Grant mentioned already. But the other one, if I had to pick one, I did find somebody earlier. Now I have to find another one because you guys named all my guys.
Say Tavon Austin.
I'm not going to say Tavon Austin. I think I'll say Cameron Meredith, even though we already kind of talked about him. I definitely like Cameron Meredith this week.
Yeah, definitely wide receiver is a good place to find some, like not as safe a value as it's more like not dart throw, but it's more guessing. You're saying, like I hate to have a week where putting in 20 hours more than your competition is putting in doesn't give you that significant of an edge because everybody's kind of guessing on these cheaper wide receivers. But there are some places to go, down there where you could get 20 points and hopefully you guess right this week. I mean, that makes it a better week to go multi-entry too, because then you load up on the smart plays.
I thought Hearns was a genius call. I thought he would have been one of my number 1 or 2 guys.
Guys, I've never been wrong on a low-priced wide receiver in my entire life.
I'm going to have Hearns everywhere.
Well, you've never been wrong ever, Grant. So that obviously excludes low-priced wide receivers too.
I like that you admit that.
So tight end, it's actually kind of a weird week where a lot of the lower-priced guys aren't really that appealing. Like you could take a flyer on Vernon Davis, who's still seeing 4 or 5 targets at 2,800, but because pricing is always so wrong at tight end, you could also just go up 900 more to Martellus Bennett if Gronk is out, or Zach Miller with no Alshon Jeffrey at 3,800. So I think that I'm likelier. And then you got guys like, just as far as mispriced guys, Delaney is 57, Jordan Reed is 59, Tyler Eifert's 54. This might actually be a week to pay up because if those guys were wide receivers, they'd be priced at 6,500 or 7K given the targets they see and the upside they have. But yeah, I probably won't go under the 3K range. But Bobby, what are you seeing from cheap tight ends? Anybody I'm just totally overlooking that's a better play than just paying a little bit extra for those 3,700 guys? Bobby, you on mute?
Yeah, you silly goose, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. No, I'm sorry about that. I don't think so. It's not somewhere that I'm going to jump all over. I feel like there's some safer guys in the 38 plus range, and I would even consider paying up for Delaney this week. Like I'm not all over it. Maybe Charles Clay. I could have a good argument for him, but he gets the targets. It's actually a pretty good spot. His targets haven't been as high as they have been in the past, but Cincinnati is so awful against the tight end. I don't know. I feel like that could be a spot, but I'm probably just going to pay up in most cases.
Here's one I just spotted. Since Kaepernick entered the lineup, Vance McDonald has exactly 6 targets in every game. So New England is usually tough against the tight end, even this year with them really breaking down on defense quite a bit. They've still been tough against the tight end, but that's one. And yeah, Charles Clay, the targets are there. It's just weird because the upside has been completely non-existent this year. He's been under 5 points in 3 straight games in spite of averaging 5 targets a game. So that's a bit weird, but those are definitely a couple spots. Grant, anybody here at tight end?
Yeah, I'm not paying up. Mr. Ladarius Green is going to be a focal point of the Pittsburgh offense. He had 4 targets this week. He's been gone from injury all year, and he's playing Cleveland, which is, I can't remember exactly how bad they are against the tight end, but it's pretty darn bad. I think they're last in the league, and he's 2,500, which is bare bones price. Cheap as all hell. Richard Rodgers is getting a lot more targets in the Green Bay offense in the last 2 weeks. For some reason, Rodgers seems to go to him before he goes to his other targets. And then Jason Witten still, I think, is near the top of the league in red zone targets, still 3,300, still getting you a very good floor when we saw a ceiling when they finally actually get him in the end zone 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, personally, I'd rather pay up to Zach Miller or Martellus and get some more guaranteed targets, but I can definitely see all those plays. One other thing you could do is roster David Johnson, the tight end, just to throw yourself off every time you see that David Johnson got another big play. You can get excited for a second before realizing that you rostered the wrong David Johnson. So
you did that this week, didn't you?
No, but every time in that Steelers game where they like David Johnson got 1 or 2 targets this last week, and then a couple other plays where they called his name, and I just wonder if anybody rosters him in the flex. Like, why is David Johnson only 2,500 and throws him in? I feel like that must happen at least once a week in some 25-cent tournament or something, which is probably pretty awesome.
I do it when
I'm
I'm
sure it does.
bored.
So I'm gonna go ahead and give my bold call, and then I'm gonna throw it to you guys for bold call and final thoughts, which means we'll go Bobby first because Grant always closes us out real strong with his crazy final thoughts. So my bold call, I'm gonna go Kaepernick for 25 or more fantasy points at 5,200 this week. I don't actually know that he'll get quite there, but 20 points doesn't seem bold enough. I'm guessing he'll hit more like 22, 23, but I'm going to say 25 for Kaepernick. So, Bobby, what do you have for a Nickelback tweet next week and for any closing thoughts?
I have Quentin Patton will be the best receiver price per dollar. And Grant mentioned him already, but he's my number one receiver this week, price per dollar. Maybe that's not bold enough because he's so cheap. But so I guess I'll go ahead and say Quentin Patton will get 20 DraftKings fantasy points.
I really like that call. I mean, I was on Patton earlier this year a few times and just got berated publicly. But
I can take it.
But
Come
yeah,
on, guys, rate me.
with the targets, I mean, again, things have changed with Kaepernick in there and targets back-to-back games. You know, Kaepernick's only going to complete 50% of his passes, but against this, Patriots secondary that has been disappointing, that's a really interesting call. I like it. Any final thoughts, Bobby? Because I'm not letting you speak again.
Okay. Well, in all, I guess when things aren't going your way and you hit rock bottom, you can only go up. So it's time to turn this NFL season around because I don't want to just be excited about basketball anymore. And it's time for me to stop getting all the right plays wrong in the wrong places and just get one of my lineups to mesh finally and stop with these nonsense middle of the pack finishes that don't even get you your money back.
I like it. This is the week.
That's it.
This is the week.
Let's do it.
Grant, what do you have for bold call and some beautiful final thoughts?
Brady's gonna get outscored by Kaepernick. Brady's gonna be a bottom half quarterback this week. Final thoughts outside of that is since I've grown my mustache this month, even female dogs are scared of me and think I look disgusting. And also, your phone is right next to either your junk or your butt all day. It gets smelly. You want it to smell good and be pleasant to talk on the phone? Rub some Nutella on it. It smells like delicious chocolate.
There we go. There's the food-related final thoughts that we were looking for. The crowd was pleased with the sleeping on your nickels thing last week, but it wasn't food-related, so it didn't quite do it for me. Nutella on the phone gets us back on track. I'm going to go for I already gave my bold call. So final thoughts. I don't have any final thoughts. Guys, thanks for hanging out. Listeners, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you back here next week, same time, same place, and we'll see you at the top of the leaderboards this weekend.